Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women Talking Money podcast. My name is Gretchen from Magenta Financial Planning, and today I'm joined by Carla Hoppe. Carla is the owner of Wealthbrite. Wealthbrite was set up in 2021 and is an award-winning adult education company, having recently won the Best Adult Education Award in the MAIA 2024 awards. I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit more about that. Wealthbrite provides in-work financial skills training, ensuring companies have employees who are money smart. Carla believes that equipping staff with financial literacy, both professionally and personally, can help them gain deeper understanding of the business and its overarching goals. And before starting Wealthbrite, Carla studied English and French law at university before becoming a corporate solicitor. She's worked both in the UK and the US and has worked for the likes of the Bank of Ireland and Tech Nation. When she has time, other than running Wealthbrite, she likes to relax by doing some running or yoga. So welcome, Carla, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me, Gretchen.
Did you just want to put a little bit more around that bio, like tell us a little bit more about what you're up to?
Sure. Well, yeah, as you said, I guess for background for people, I started off life as a lawyer, but quickly moved out of law into wider professional services. I actually spent the vast majority of my career working for both PwC and EY. So I spent most of my life working in the Big Four, which are global accountancy firms. So deeply entrenched in all things related to finance, money, businesses, and particularly around international businesses as they were expanding. So my specialism was helping companies either grow overseas or take part in mergers and acquisitions between different companies. So in my day job, I was getting to know clients and companies that were constantly looking at how they could improve or increase their financial goals, right? At its bottom line, I guess, most companies that exist in the world are there to make money and they always want to make more of it. And this curious dynamic would come up as part of conversations in our learning and development framework within my organizations, and also as part of our our social outreach programs, where we were looking at what are the skills for the future and what are some of those skills for life that are important for young people to have at the start of their careers as they join organizations like the ones I used to work for. And the topic of financial skills came up time and time again. And it was a curious one because on the one hand, for the vast majority of people, they're not taught this in school. And so there was maybe sometimes a gap between what employers thought they knew about the way of the world and about how to manage their own finances and what people actually knew in practice. But on the other hand, there was this very clear hunger amongst young people, and I was doing lots of school outreach programs and hosting events within PwC particularly, talking to young people, and it was very clear they wanted to know more about this topic. They were looking for trusted resources. They wanted to upskill themselves and even pre-skill themselves ahead of joining companies like mine, so that they could be more successful. And I guess some of that learnings and those observations was ultimately led me to starting Wealthbrite. I got really excited about this area and topic of interest, and I was involved in sort of preparing and creating training programs, and got to the stage in my life where I was sort of like at a crossroads where I had to make a decision. Am I all in and becoming a partner in the Big Four, or am I going to explore this other thing that kind of is driving a lot of passion in my life, and that I have this really deep-seated belief that we can make really material change in terms of how young people are introduced to the dynamics of the financial world in a really meaningful way. And I decided back in 2021, as you said, to take the plunge and step away from my traditional corporate professional life and join this wonderful dynamic universe of being an entrepreneur. So here we are.
Excellent. I mean, it sounds like it's really grounded on, personal values and where you want to be, and there's nothing more rewarding than being able to hopefully, run a successful business with like something that you're really passionate about. So it's great to hear that kind of background for everyone. And if people want to find Wealthbrite, what's the easiest way to do that?
Just go onto our website, it's wealthbrite.co.uk, or follow me on LinkedIn and you'll easily find navigation points to finding out more about us. And you can always drop me a DM on LinkedIn if you want to, or grab hold of my email details, which are very clear for everybody to see if they want to pop me an email and find out about how we can help. I mean, our day-to-day in terms of what we offer businesses is just like you said, it's financial skills training for young people, both in terms of commercial awareness and understanding how businesses make and manage money, but also then what does that mean for them on a personal level. So it's really telling that holistic story between what their organizations are doing and how they have a role in helping achieve commercial goals and the financial goals of the business. But then, so what does that mean when they get their pay slip and they're introduced to financial benefits as well?
It's really interesting. I mean, anyone who listened to the episode I did with Hope Coombs, she's from Australia and had been working in London for many years, but I couldn't believe the amount of education that goes on there in school versus what goes on here. So we know there's a massive gap here and in Europe, and yeah, really, really interesting to see how different that is amongst other
I think that's right.
as well.
Yeah, it's something that's really quite remarkable in terms of the true cost of poor financial literacy. I mean, I don't know if you've heard these numbers before, but when I first heard them, they kind of blew my mind, right? So the Confederation for British Industry, so the CBI economics team, did a deep dive piece of research into looking at the cost of poor financial literacy in the UK to British businesses. And the way they kind of, I guess, tallied or costed it up was to say, when people are lacking in financial literacy, they may be more vulnerable to financial stresses, pressures, anxieties. And as a result, it will impact their performance at work and their productivity in the workplace. And when they put some numbers around, okay, that might result in mental health issues in the workplace, so increased cost of insurance premiums. It might mean absences from the workplace, both short-term and long-term sick absence costs. And then just the cost of sort of, people who may be presenting as in work but not performing to the best of their ability because they've got that nagging anxiety on their shoulder, right? And by their estimates, it costs the UK economy £20 billion annually, which is a terrifying number, right? And if you think about the fact that the UK has, in the last sort of decade, really kind of struggled to turn its productivity gap around, my attitude is this is a really quick, easy win. We need to be powering up the British economy by giving people the fundamentals of financial education, because this is the thing that can help reduce the number one leading cause of stress and anxiety in working adults in the UK, and help them understand, oh, that's why my role is important in the business, because now I understand that I'm not just doing this little job that I've been asked to do over here. I can connect the dots between what I'm being asked to do every day and how my business actually makes money and what that means, not just for my company, but then also for me. So to me, I think there's a tendency sometimes, I don't know if this is just a naturally British attitude, to look at the downside and the cost as a negative. For me, I say this is at its absolute lowest. It's a £20 billion opportunity for the UK. It seems a no-brainer to me that we need to rapidly introduce financial education, not just in schools, like you said, but actually in the workplace, because that's where we can start to see that impact on the economy.
I think it's another debate, and possibly not for today's conversation, about whether school is the right place for that, or whether actually we should be doing it more at work level when we're actually earning money. We can actually relate to it. We can build a budget if you're teaching kids about that when they have no money and they can't actually practice it, like we can't actually apply that knowledge. So I struggle with where the delivery really should be, which is probably, again, everyone's like school, but I'm not sure that that's the right place, but that's another debate to be had.
Yeah, at Wealthbrite, we really operate on a sort of just-in-time model. So we believe the education that we provide is the right education delivered to people at a time and a place where they will most use it. So we have a very specific focus on upskilling or pre-skilling early careers talent. We look at helping them build foundational knowledge about finance and money, because we know at that time of life, they have so many questions. It's just such a turbulent, changing time in your adulthood. And actually, by giving them rules of thumb that they can learn to live by, we can set them up for success later down the line. So we really have looked at I guess, the spectrum of opportunity of where you could deliver education and said, this is a time and place where we know we can have a lot of impact because they're crying out for help and knowledge and resources. And we believe it will convert into really meaningful, I guess, returns for their businesses, because again, they're in like sponge mode at the beginning of your career. You just like try to soak up as much juice as possible so you can learn how to be the best at your job. And I think that's a really nice, natural place to sort of bring in financial education into the system. So that's the way we've done it anyway. But I agree with you, that wider debate, well, I'm sure it'll continue for many years to come.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today we're here to talk a little bit, ask you some questions about your money story, I guess. So, can you tell me? Let's get started. And can you tell me a little bit about what maybe you heard when you were growing up about money, and whether it was spoken about in your family?
Yeah, so I guess for background for people to know, I come from quite a mixed cultural heritage background. So I've got like mixed European through my dad's side, and on my mum's side we have sort of Indian family, Asian heritage. So I think just even those cultural dynamics certainly showed up in how money was talked about at home. And there's quite different ways of approaching it. I also think there's something to be said with the religious dynamics as well. Certainly for a lot of my family, talking about money was when it was talked about either through the lens of tithing, because that was a principle by which my family lived by. My parents, even though they didn't really have a lot of money, systematically chose to tithe, so give 10% to the church. And I remember as a child, I'm the eldest of four, and I was very observant of the fact that we didn't always have a lot of money and that we were having to make tough choices, or I felt that at times we were struggling. And I remember being quite resentful of the fact that my parents chose to give their money to church and not spend it on us. So it was interesting. I don't remember ever talking to my parents about that, but it was something that as a child I was watching, I was learning. And it's that whole thing about like, even when money isn't spoken about, as a young child, I was observing a lot of information about what was happening around me, right? And then I guess like I think, my parents come, especially my dad, who's from a very working class background. And I think, we talked about money really purely through the lens of spend or save, right? And I guess spending was always quite, I think for a long time, it's actually my dad and I have talked about this a lot. He went through a real transformation in his own mindset around money. So up until I guess he was about 40, he would have very much just sort of spent as he earned. Didn't really, he was earning okay money, but for a while was the single earner in our household. So it was just spending, and they didn't really keep track of it. And he has talked to me about how, as a man, it was very challenging for him to find someone he could talk to about what he should be doing with his money. And actually, he had a good friend later in his 40s who sat him down and taught him how to build a budget, and literally taught him how to track his spending and to think about things like bumpy spending in the year. And of course, my dad had 4 kids, like trying to keep track of costs across all of us and varying degrees of who needed what when. And, there was always some accident happening, which meant there was a bumpy cost coming out of the woodwork somewhere that he didn't expect. And it's only been in my later years that my dad's opened up and talked to me about this. But at the time, I think, one, I was painfully aware when money wasn't in a good place right at home, and what that I guess led to in me and my personal behaviors was I was very motivated by money whenever I was a young person. So I was sort of quite reactive to my upbringing. I did well at school. I went to school in Northern Ireland, so I sat the 11 plus because that's the system they have there. And I got into a grammar school, but I was suddenly surrounded by kids who were far wealthier than we were, right? And so I think from my teenage years, I spent a lot of my time just being quite jealous of other people, and feeling like we didn't have enough and being annoyed by it. And unfortunately, I think at times that led to me asking my parents to spend money on me so I could do big school trips, for example. And my parents at that time wanted to give me those opportunities that they didn't have. And so they sometimes did say yes. But then I was very aware afterwards of the fact that they'd overstretched themselves. And so there was this sort of like weird cycle between like the upside of me feeling very happy that they spent money, but then the downside cycle of being like, I was seeing the emotional backlash of them having overextended themselves and then having to make tough decisions. So I think it's a weird one because I don't think any of those things are necessarily bad. I think we sort of had a really good mix of experiences talking and observing things about money. I think it's probably pretty relatable to a lot of people growing up. Parents don't always get it right. They were trying to figure stuff out for themselves for the first time. And but I think in terms of what that's done for me is, well, first of all, as I said, as a young adult, I wanted to, no two ways about it. I wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to earn enough money that I never had to have those same sort of moments of doubt that my parents did about, even simple things like remember, cards not working at supermarkets and stuff like that. I never wanted that shame to exist in my life. But interestingly, as I went through my career, I guess I ultimately came to the conclusion that I wasn't actually personally like that wasn't a value that actually resided within me. Just chasing money wasn't actually enough. And I think having pursued my ambition to just rise up the corporate ladder and just earn more and earn more and earn more, I got to the stage where I realized like this just isn't doing it for me. It's not enough. And that's obviously a privileged place to have gotten to, that I was able to reflect and take that step back. But what it made me kind of realize is I'm fascinated by the conversation about money and the mindset behind people's behaviors with money. But actually, for me personally, just chasing money was never going to be enough.
Some really interesting things there. I'm just going to pick out a couple of things. So the one I'm really interested in is because it's not something that's come up before. So this concept of the tithe to the church, and at the time you feeling like, why are we doing that when we're, tight? Do you think that has impacted your thought process about money as well?
Well, that's interesting. Well, I don't know. I do today regularly. I have a regular donation I make to some charities. So I guess it hasn't sort of turned me away from the value of contributing to causes or beliefs that you resonate with. I understand that for my parents, this was something that was very important to them. And I think over the years, I guess I can stand back and say, okay, I understand that for my parents, this was something that was very grounded in personal beliefs. And I guess it's hard to understand that as a young child. You just see this sort of, maybe you only see the one side of the in and the out and feel like you're being, I don't know, hard done by for whatever reason. I think what you maybe didn't see, or what I didn't see certainly maybe enough of at the time, was that my parents relied on people at church for a lot of like emotional and community support. I mean, the person I mentioned who ended up being my dad's sort of money mentor came from their church. So in some ways, like, had he not been so tied to that community, he may not have ever discovered his own path to figuring out his financial habits and behaviors and what that would mean for our family more generally. So I don't think it's left me with any negative feelings. Let me put it that way. I think I can reflect a bit more maturely on it now.
It's just really interesting because um, it's not something now that, and I'm using very generalization, we're less tending to be less religious, tending to be
Mm,
more atheist in the UK and in this
yeah,
country, and a lot less decisions are based around community of religion. So, as you say, people might choose to give to a charity or something that they believe in, but let's face it, the majority are not
mm,
giving. Still deal with clients who are, but not
yeah,
generally giving in the same way as we used to church. But I think that's very true, as you say, that I was listening to a podcast about the fact that actually the church used to be that community that we could then
mm,
rely on when you were having when you're having a bad time, or
mm,
especially, it's really interesting that you say it's your dad that then, the man who helped him with his money worries.
yeah,
Because this podcast I was listening to was specifically about men and about do they have anyone to talk to.
mm,
So this is a women talking money podcast, but it's still, super relevant as to like whether, and as people, we have the right people to be able to turn to. So I
yeah,
think the whole concept is really interesting from a broader social perspective as well, that
mm.
we're not really doing that kind of thing as often, you know. It's
Yeah,
just a really interesting
I think it
topic
is
for me.
interesting. Yeah, I think there's something about religious or even social communities that have historically existed where people have come together and had a practice where they would either pool resources or give money in order to get something back. And you're right that I think certainly for my parents, the act of tithing, I know that my parents would have had a very strong feeling that what they got back out of that community was well in excess of anything they gave, right? All across, that went to the friendships, the mentoring, but also practical help. I recall many times when someone from church would kind of stamp up for childcare for some of us, if my parents needed to go out and do something, or, even clothing, like secondhand clothing, or help with, my parents have given and gotten, furniture if we move to a new home, or helping with other people who are new in a community or just arrived to wherever we happen to live. So I think the social contract that existed between them and that community was such that tithing was, I guess, not a financial burden. It was something they did really willingly because of what they got
Mm,
back from that. I do know in other communities, it's interesting because, like, I think about my Indian heritage. In Indian cultures, there is a culture of pooling financial resources between family members or friendship groups. So there's lots of different words for this. And actually, there's a wonderful founder called Nina Maharshi who set up an app called Bloom to kind of try and formalize and bring this kind of practice into the tech space. There's this idea that we lean on people in our social communities to kind of shore us up at times of need. And there's an understanding in the community that, well, you might need this month or this week, but I will need at another point in time and you will be there for me. And those types of social engagements, I think, are much less common in like a traditional British community today, which is a bit sad in some ways. It's a bit like the fact that it's a bit of a joke, but it's somewhat true. Like moving from Northern Ireland to London at 18, I used to chat to people on the bus all the time, and I'd get on the bus in London and talk to the person next to me, and they'd look at me like I had three heads. They'd be like, "Who? What? Why?" And we have a practice in some parts of the UK of not really getting to know the people in our communities, and that has led to a bit of a loss of some of these types of practices. I think as a result, and coming back to our financial education has to kind of step in here, is that we've swapped the natural kind of storytelling that would have come from people around us for a kind of quite an info-based approach. So we've got Google as our kind of replacement person to ask, what should I be doing now? Or where do I go for this? And I mean, I guess this is something in how we do Wealthbrite as well, is like, as wonderful as technology is, and it is wonderful, humans crave stories. That's how we learn best. And I think technology hasn't yet developed sufficiently to tell stories in a way that will resonate, because that comes down to you and me being able to sit and swap, real time exchange of ideas based on a shared history or commonalities between us. And I think that's what excites me about being able to kind of like take, I guess I get excited when I think about, okay, so if that's what humans crave, how do we recreate that in how we deliver financial education? How do we take, because frankly, there's already if you want to know an answer to a question, you can get it on Google. That's not what stops people acting, right? It's if all we needed was access to information, we'd all be, multimillionaires doing the right thing all the time. But what we really need is the guidance that comes from another human, another person, and those stories that can start to help change mindsets and behaviors. So yeah, there's a lot in there, but I think it's fascinating, the cultural and social
There's a lot in
overlays.
there. Yeah. And the more and more I talk and the more and more things I listen to, the more and more overlaps there are with a lot of conversations and the problems we have talking about money, or just generally good community, like where you can get your touch points, where you can get your support and your resources with the communities that, or lack of communities that we have now. It's,
Mm,
that is a really big challenge.
yeah.
So I'm really, it's really fascinating to hear all about that. Um, I had some questions about budgeting, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm going to ask this question instead, which is, can you describe your first major purchase that you can remember that you made or with your own money
Oh,
when you've been working for the pennies?
do you know what? Can I remember? I think so. I'll tell you a story. As I said, I was quite motivated by money as a trainee solicitor. So my first job was my first job as a professional wasn't my first job, but my first professional job was as a trainee solicitor, and I was earning £30,000 at the time. Right, so that was my contract from PwC, which I actually still have. I lifted out a copy of it earlier just to double check. I was like, I think it was 30K I was on, and I remember getting my first paycheck. Maybe it was the first or second at that point, and I bought myself a Reese handbag. So
A,
that
a
was what
Reese
I wanted.
handbag.
A
Yeah.
Reese handbag. And yes, it was a black leather handbag with like sort of a cowhide front to it. It was beautiful. It's beautiful. And it cost a lot of money. And when I reflect, I loved it. I loved the bag at the time. I don't have it anymore, which sadly it didn't last that long. But I suppose if I think about the person who bought that bag, I think that person was desperate to look the part. Now in Wealthbrite, I do a lot of work in the legal sector, and we do an annual industry deep dive into the financial health and wellness of young lawyers, particularly. And one of the questions we ask every year is, do you feel pressure to spend beyond your means to keep up with a certain lifestyle? And systematically it comes back, yes, 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 yes. And there's this like image of the successful lawyer that has been perpetuated by programs like Suits and others. And,
Yeah.
I think still pervades the industry, even though the vast majority of lawyers don't earn anywhere near the kind of money that people think they do. But there's this kind of glamorization of the profession that says, well, you have to eat or drink in certain places and look the part and wear these types of clothes, and this is how you live your life now. And I bought into that big time. And as I progressed through my training contract, when I qualified, I got like basically a doubling of my salary. And I was all of a sudden earning more than my dad ever had in his professional career. I couldn't ask my family for advice with money because they were like, are you living a weird, wildly different life to us now? I didn't feel like I could ask anybody at work because I was like already didn't fit in, right? And I think, I as a result, just really for the first few years of my career, really bought into this sort of lifestyle inflation kind of thing where the more I earned, the more I spent, right? And it was all about putting on the cloak of what I thought it meant to be successful, and giving off the vibes of being financially successful, when actually, I had consumer credit debt, I had 60 grand of student debt I was trying to pay off. I didn't have, it took me good couple of years, more than that, to get out from underneath my uni overdraft. Still living in my overdraft. The truth was, behind the scenes, I didn't have control over my spending habits. But so I think I look back at that purchase and think, oh, I don't begrudge myself the buy, but I wish I'd had some more guidance about how to think about using my money.
I think that's really interesting, because I think, we should all celebrate if we can afford a nice thing. It's not a bad thing, is it, to kind of buy
Right.
something for yourself? But if behind the scenes it's perpetuated with really bad financial management, and I think that what you're explaining, I experienced to a degree, but those kind of first years of jobs, especially in professional services, there's an awful lot of like pressure. At least I certainly felt that there used to be, about fitting into that kind of crowd, and
Absolutely.
looking a certain way. I think luckily with financial services, financial planning, that is slowly changing, especially in smaller companies, smaller to medium sized companies. Some of the big corporates, there's still that kind of pressure, but I do think with ours it's changing a little bit,
Mm.
which is good to see. But I think the lawyers and solicitors are always kind of a step back. It's a bit like going paperless. It took them
Yes.
longer than it took us.
Exactly.
So we've got a
Exactly.
few years to kind of get there.
Yeah.
But so off the back of that, I guess it might be quite interesting to know then, so your approach to money, how you think your approach to money certainly has changed as you've aged,
Mm.
or as you progress through your career, and then decisions that you're making now.
Yeah, I think, the word I would use is mindful. I'm a lot more mindful about my money. I think that's come from a lot of trial and error along the way. I think I got to a stage in my career where, actually, I'd made it a priority to pay off my student debts before I would do anything else. Once I'd done that, then I really started to ask myself, what should I be doing with my money beyond just living my life, right? And again, like, don't get me wrong, I wanted, I was living in London. Actually, it was probably in the US at that point, but like living in London, living a nice life. I wasn't saying particularly no to myself, but I wanted to start being able to take a little bit more of a strategic approach to my finances. And I guess that's maybe because at the time I was afraid of getting it wrong. But I think I also, at various points in my career, started to think about, well, what would my life look like if I didn't do this as a job forever? um, and, I was painfully aware of the fact that I was on a very good salary, and maybe I wouldn't always be on that really good salary, right? So I wanted to maximize the opportunity that I had at that time. And so I guess I've tried as much as possible to like be brave enough to talk to people about what that means in practice. And over the years, sort of built up my knowledge and my confidence, and then of course got really fascinated about this topic more generally, so much so that I'm now leading a company helping other people learn. But I suppose, I think mindful is the word I would say now, is even how I practice with my money today. And actually, for those who are interested, life as a founder is definitely not as financially rewarding as life in the professional services. So I've sort of gone through a whole 360-degree circle of like what it means to kind of the ups and downs of finances, right?
I was going to say, I think that's quite an interesting one just to focus on quickly, because,
Mm,
to leave what was a very lucrative, well-paid job to
mm,
do something at the start. They said, how amazing is it to be doing something that you believe in and you're passionate about,
mm,
but those decisions don't always come with the same financial rewards as
yeah,
might be if you're, the old saying, we've been working for the man,
yeah,
in a legal profession.
yeah.
So did you do a lot of prep or a lot of thinking about it? Did you, I mean, thinking definitely spent a lot of time thinking about it, but from a kind of financial perspective, did you lay out groundwork for yourself? Like, I want to get to this point, I want to have this much, and then I'm going to do it, and have a business plan for that or a personal plan for that? What did you do?
I definitely had a plan around just so I guess when I got to a certain level in my career, I started working with a financial advisor, started working to accumulate savings, accumulate wealth essentially. And my strategy, I've been pretty good around just keeping at that stage. I'd gotten really good. I didn't have significant levels of debt. I was putting into my workplace pension and maxing those contributions, but it wasn't necessarily I can do more around the sort of natural, like just like a nest, right, for emergencies. So I did a lot more work around building that pot up and putting money into places that was a blend of like hard to get hold of versus slightly easier to access if I needed, right? And I think I had got myself to a stage where I did feel like I had, I guess, personal financial runway. So I could take that decision. I mean, for people, just to be absolutely clear about this, for the first, I've only been full time in my business for the last 10 months. So I have worked part time consulting up until that point. So it wasn't the case that I went all in immediately and just sort of went, no, it's fine, I can do it all, right? And I did that deliberately. I knew I had financial responsibilities that were going to continue regardless of my earnings. And I felt it was important, particularly at the earlier stages of Wealthbrite, to keep my hand in with my profession whilst I figured out what it was that Wealthbrite would become. And, people may have heard about organizations, startups looking for product market fit. And it's a case of trial and error, building your business and figuring out where does it fit and what is it that people most want to buy from you. And during that time, there's a lot of turbulence and a lot of ups and downs. And it's not guaranteed that you're going to be successful. Still not guaranteed we're going to be sort of long-term successful, right? That's the nature of startup land. But for me, it was important to have some sort of regular earnings, at least in the initial period. Now, as it happens, it was about a year ago, coming up to a year ago, I got to the stage where I was like, well, how can I ask anybody else to invest in this business if I'm not prepared to invest all in myself, right? So I took that leap a year ago. Since then, again, I'm really happy to share with your audience. I've only just started taking a salary from the business, a small salary. I earn far less than anyone else in my business. That's the choice I've made, is the choice I can make. I have a very supportive partner who helps with a lot of the household bills. He has picked up a lot of the financial slack because he believes in what I'm doing and believes in what I'm building. And I'm very fortunate to have him as a sort of personal and financial champion at this time. And I guess what I've taken away from this whole experience is that it's very, very difficult financially to start a business, both in terms of the risk you have to be willing to take of not getting it right and it all crashing down. The attitude I try to keep is, hey, if this doesn't end up being the runaway superstar success that I hope it will be, that I have some wonderful credentials in my back pocket already, and I will have learned so much that I can use to build on for future. So I try not to worry too much about that. That I'd be lying if I said it didn't sometimes keep me awake at night. And I guess it has thrown up the importance of having really honest financial conversations at home as well, because I am definitely, independent woman, want to be successful by myself. So I'm not always comfortable with the fact that my male partner is doing a lot of the like financial heavy lifting for us at the minute. But, what we try and do is have regular conversations about it and remind each other that, financial support is only one part of the relationship spectrum, right? And, there will be times in our life where I do the leaning in and he takes a back step and vice versa. And this is just a moment in our lives where I am leaning very heavily into building a business and he is supporting me and he is sort of championing me behind me. So yeah, it's look, it's a wild ride, and talking about money in your business is a big part of that wild ride as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, most people who run businesses, we all get pretty comfortable with like talking about money in the business. But I think what's really interesting talking to you is that, without me saying you are also doing that at home and appreciating that that's really important. But that's because of your experience of what you're teaching with Wealthbrite and all of that. When a lot of people, they can't be talking to like even competitors about
Yeah,
money, but not
yeah,
comfortable with doing it at home. And I think,
yeah.
or not talking about doing it with their friends, or,
Mm,
yeah, no, that's it, we've got all these money taboos of it being, crass that you would bring up money at a point, when then we actually miss out on those opportunities to like help one another, support one another, or just empower one another to
mm,
be, to feel confident.
mm.
Um, so that's really interesting. That's sort of, that's something that's obviously you already know how important that is, to kind of do and have
Doesn't
a
mean it's
space
always
to talk to
easy.
people. No, no, not at all. And we all know everyone has different triggers
Yep.
and different thoughts about money and things that set them off or things they're comfortable with. So it's
Mm.
the fine line to be trodden for sure. Okay, so let's try and round up. I've got two more questions then. So, thinking about something you said earlier, which was about when you were working, you got to the stage where people were maybe helping you with with financial advice or talking to people about financial.
Yes.
What's the best financial advice you've ever received? Or
Oh,
tip? Could be a tip, or it could be a saying that stuck with you, something that you've carried forward.
actually, do you know, it's something I share with people all the time in Wealthbrite. So when I first started working with my IFA, I was really nervous actually, going into that conversation. I sort of like felt a bit like a fish out of water, and had this image that we were going to like talk about complex investments and stuff like this. And I remember having this conversation, and my advisor was like getting me to run through like my assets list. And I was like, yeah, I don't really have any. Yeah, I don't own a house yet. Oh, no. Oh, sorry, no. Feeling really bad about myself. Then he was like, okay, that's all. What debts do you have? And I was like, oh no, I don't have any of those. I've gotten rid of those. That's cool. And he was like, okay, so you're not in a bad place. Like most people come to me have like small assets, massive debt, all this stuff. And I was like, okay. And he was like, so what's your goal? And I was like, oh, well, I just want to be comfortable. And it was the first time someone had asked me to articulate, like, why was I having this conversation? What was I actually trying to achieve? And, really when we got into it, we started exploring like ideologies around security and financial freedom and what that meant to me. And it was really interesting because the reason I ultimately ended up working with advisors because he said to me, he said, look, I can absolutely work with you now and we can start investing. But here's my advice to you. Go away and work on that emergency fund. Get to the number we've discussed. And when you've got it, come back to me. And then we can start having this conversation about sexy investment. And I was kind of blown away that he would just like do that because I was just expecting to be sold to, right? I was expecting to find someone who would just be like, see the sort of the pound signs of my salary and my earnings or my income projections at those points. And I think it's a really powerful sort of lesson because I meet a lot of young people today who are kind of obsessed with investing, right? They just want to know, you ask them like, what do you most want to learn about? Investing. And I say, okay, that's cool. We should absolutely talk about investing. Have you guys got emergency funds? Like, talk to me about how much you've got in savings and there. And one of the questions I get back quite a lot is, well, what's an emergency that I should be saving for, right? That's where we're starting. And so I always use this story as an opportunity for them to learn that, like, actually, prioritize that like fallback, that safety net first, then we can start playing around with other things and more exciting things. And, it's not that one is mutually exclusive from the other, but that's a piece of advice that's always stuck with me.
Fantastic, because it leads me really, really nicely onto, because it feels like you asked the question, we've reflected on it. So after having thought about this a lot more and set your goals and thought about it, what does financial freedom, look like or mean to you then?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting story. I think right now, and let me tell you what it means to me right now. So for me, I've come to the conclusion that I don't have one definition. I have a personal goal around the level of income I would like to have by my retirement age. I have an ideal retirement age, but I have a long stock retirement age. That's about as detailed as it's gotten for me around, like, what does Carla as a pensioner do, right? Right now, though, actually, I work around the ideas of what do I want my life to look like in the next 10, 15 years. And for me right now, I have a kind of working goal around flexibility around where I work and how I work, which requires some financial freedom to be able to make those choices. I would like to be able to spend a little bit more time over the coming years abroad. I have family in Holland. I'd love to spend more time in Holland. I'd like to have the flexibility to maybe work outside of the UK for a few months a year if I can. I want to grow my business. I want to take it internationally. And so for me, I focus less on numbers, more on numbers they kind of get reversed engineered out of it. But it's about things like, I want to be able to go on one big holiday every year, right? I want to be able to go and spend time with my family in California, my family outside of the UK. I always planned for being able to host family at Christmas and do a big thing at Christmas. And, for me, it's more about attaching on to the things that are important in my life. Like, who do I want to spend time with and what do I want to be doing? And once I'm clear on those things, I try wherever possible to kind of like give them a timeline. So some of these things are like by the age of 45, by the age of 50. And some of these are just like, I do them every year. And then I work back from there as to what it's going to cost me in order to deliver on that goal. And, I can be a really real example, Gretchen. I just had my 40th birthday and my friends laugh at me, but I started planning for my 40th birthday when I was 36 years old because I had a very clear image of what I wanted to do. I wanted to take all my friends to France, to Burgundy, to stay in this wonderful location, to go wine tasting and cycling and eat lots of bread and cheese. And I had all of it worked out, costings down to as close as I could, right? And then I worked out, okay, well, I want to just be able to ask my friends to show up. They have to get themselves there, but everything else is on me, right? And this is a big spend for me. But I worked it out. And I realized when I worked it out that I was going to need to start saving at age 36. And, I was flippantly joking with my friends about, because they were joking with me while we were away. Well, Jesus, this is 40, what's 50? And I was like, well, girls, bigger and better. And the
Better
thing
start
is,
now.
but I enjoy that. I've gotten to a stage now where I actually really enjoy the act of setting that little savings pot up and knowing that, if I worked it out the other day, I give myself like a budget that is quite a big budget for what would be a really big blowout 50th birthday. Working back over 10 years, well, okay, so maybe I have to save like 40, 50 quid a year, or a month, sorry, and actually getting into the practice and habit of doing those types of things in order to achieve those goals and that financial freedom that we've described now brings me an awful lot of joy, which is, I guess, quite a radical shift in mindset from where I started, right? From what we talked about right from the beginning of this podcast. But so financial freedom really for me just means the opportunity to create special moments for the people that matter most to me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with me today. I really appreciate it. There is some really interesting stuff we've talked about, and I know that went off piste a little bit on questions, but some stuff just was really important to talk about. So thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed it.
I did. I really thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Great, thank you.
Bye.